January 1966, I told you I would tell you the story about how the recruiter screwed me over. So I went into the office of the recruiter in small town Guyman, Oklahoma, and I told him I wanted to enlist because I didn't want to be drafted. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, at college I'm studying to go into physical therapy. I would like to go into physical therapy." And he said, "Okay, I can sign you up for that. You sign the papers here, and you would do your first training as a combat medical corpsman. And then after that, you go to physical therapy school. And when you're getting close to finishing your combat or your basic training, you tell your company commander that you're supposed to go to physical therapy school." Yeah, right. When you've been in the military in basic training for 24 hours, you know that as a recruit, you don't go and talk to your company commander. That's how I ended up being a medical corpsman, ready for combat. The entire purpose of basic training is to take you out of your personality and put you into something that the military wants to create. Very dehumanizing, to say the least. First thing that happens to you when you get into basic training is the famous haircut. I'm sure you've heard or seen images of the famous haircut. They ask you how you want it, then they shave your head. It's all lying on the floor right beside you. Then from there, you go and you get your uniform. They gave me shoes, they gave me combat boots, they gave me fatigue pants, fatigue shirt, belt, hat, coat, and then they sewed into each one of these articles of clothing an identification strip that said my name, my serial number, and my blood type. And I was enjoying that thought until someone explained to me the purpose. And the purpose, if you're involved in an accident where there are only parts of your body left, they have to have something to be able to identify you by. They can use these strips with your names. You wake up in the morning, the first thing you have to do, this happens to almost all human beings, you have to go to the bathroom. Well, in the Army, you sit on a toilet along with about 20 other people, half on the right, half on the left, if you happen to be in the middle, with no division in between. That in itself is dehumanizing. Shower, same thing. We had to get a series of injections, immunizations. And the Army was implementing something that they saw as a time saver. And they were basically using kind of like an air gun to inject the serum into our bodies. They had us lined up one by one going into the dispensary. We're waiting in line to get in, and others are coming out. Their t-shirt is rolled up over their right shoulder so that they could receive their injection. And shockingly, many of them are coming out with blood running down their arm. Later discovered that if you flinch when you're getting the injection, just enough, it can slice you. And in some cases, even requires stitches. The military has since stopped using the air gun for injections. I gained a degree of notoriety in basic training, and we had to go through a series of monkey bars, 44 bars, in which you traverse basically like a monkey, traveling one arm to one bar, one arm to another bar, one arm to one bar, one arm to another bar. We had a recruit that was quite overweight. He would grab the bars and immediately fall down. The drill sergeant put him on the ground, on his back, had him lift his legs up into the air, put his arms up in the air, and keep screaming at the top of his lungs, "I am a dying cockroach," while everyone else went through the monkey bars. And then when everyone was finished, he would be the last one to go into the mess hall. But where my notoriety came from, as a gymnast, when I grabbed the bars, I didn't traverse one to the other. I went from one and skipped, hopped to number 3, skipped, hopped to number 5, skipped, hopped to number 7, until I was through all of the bars. I gained a degree of respect. I do have to say that the 10 weeks of medical training that I did for the job that I was to do for the remainder of my 3+ years, this training was not beneficial at all. So almost all of the training at Fort Sam Houston was geared towards the training of field medics. Learned how to put a litter with a patient on it into a helicopter. We learned how to put fake rubber injuries on different parts of the body, on the abdomen, on the legs, on the head, and then put a field dressing on that. Different things like that. And none of that was really applicable to what I would be doing once I got my assignment. One day our program was to learn how to give injections. So we had a syringe and we had a small bottle of sterile saline water. We were taught how to put water into the syringe, and then it was time for us to give the injection. Not to an orange or a grapefruit or anything like that, but to a human body. So we were divided 2 by 2s. There were about 20 of us in the room, 4 to a table, and the syringes were loaded with the sterile water, sterile saline water. We were instructed, half of us, to pull our pants down, lean over the table, and the other would give you an injection. Typical military, everything is done by numbers, and so the sergeant explains, I'll count 1, you get the syringe ready. Number 2, you wipe the buttocks with an alcohol swab. Number 3, you inject the syringe, and number 4, you pull the syringe out. So I'm leaning over the table. The sergeant counts 1, 2, the injection. I never felt anything. Everyone else was finished, and my guy apparently was still shaking, holding the syringe. And when the sergeant came over, he said, I can't do it. And the sergeant said, excuse the profanity, but you goddamn will do it. And he said, if you don't inject that into his buttocks, I'll push it in. Meanwhile, I'm down here wondering what in the world is going on. Well, the sergeant says, I'm going to count again. And he begins counting. 1, 2, I felt the jab. It came out because he didn't stick it in far enough, and then he jabbed it in again and injected me. 9 years later, I would be in nursing school in Rapid City, South Dakota, paired up with another man. And the same thing happened again. Is that why I gave up nursing? No, you'll find out later why I gave up nursing. Engaged, and I was planning on getting married after I finished my medical corpsman training of 10 weeks. And I felt like I need to earn some extra money. So I went around to the enlisted men's quarters where the enlisted married men would be with their wives and their children, their families, etc. And I went around one Saturday knocking on doors, asking if there was anything that I could do to help out to earn a few extra bucks. I knocked on the door, get turned down, walked to the next house, knock on the door, get turned down, walked on to the next house. And the lady looked at me, she looked back at her husband, and she said, no, left. I'm walking down the sidewalk, and the lady comes out and she said, excuse me, my husband and I were just talking and we decided that, yes, we could use some help. So I spent that day sweeping out the garage, cleaning some things in the backyard. They asked me to come back on Sunday. I went back on Sunday. I cleaned windows on the outside of the house. Went back the next Saturday and worked. I cleaned in the house. I washed dishes. I did all kinds of things. And on Sunday, the couple asked me, why don't you just come over here on Friday after you finish your training and stay here for the weekend? We can find plenty for you to do. And you would probably like to get away from the barracks. I jumped at the thought. So every weekend I would go there. And they were fantastic with me. They really opened up their door. They opened up their hearts. And getting towards the end of my 10-week training, one Sunday they asked me, hey, would you like to go to the other side of San Antonio with us? Wow, I'd never even been off base. So I sat in the back seat, and they're driving. And we get to a certain area in San Antonio, and the husband turns towards me. The wife is driving, and the husband says, do you see the blanket in the back seat beside you? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, what you're going to have to do now is lie down in that space between the back seat and the front seat and cover yourself with that blanket. We're going to be going through a neighborhood where you can't be seen with us. That was my first very emphatic exposure to racial discrimination. The family was black and I was white. At the end of the 10 weeks, the family, they gave me a wedding gift. And I went from their house, got on the plane, and as I started to walk into the body of the plane, the stewardess said, excuse me, you'll have to leave that package here. She put it in that little closet and said, you can pick it up on the way out. Got to Amarillo, Texas, walked out, got to the closet. The gift wasn't there. I've never been able to thank that couple for the things that they taught me, for the things that they offered me in friendship. It was a fantastic experience. I had a 30-day leave. And in those 30 days, I got married. Aloha. Hello. Goodbye. Peace, love, and compassion.